Foreman he wasn't this superstar. He wasn't this marketable fighter. And he said that the Rumble in the Jungle was only big because of Muhammad Ali and not because of George Foreman, and that selling grills doesn't equate to marketability.
Not true, because he would have fought anybody else who wouldn't have been nearly as big. So he's wrong.
Correct. You were there, right? You were there. You were in the business when Foreman was active, correct?
Well, in his second career, he came back in '87, and he fought up until like '97, and I started the business in '91. But I was a huge fan of during that period of time.
Correct. So for the younger generation that lived through that, how big of a star was George Foreman?
Big.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. He became an icon. What does that tell you? That's how wrong that guy is.
They just made a movie about him, like about
a movie, books, made $200 million from a grill. I mean, come on. What more do you want? Guy was an icon. What's he talking about?
You can't do no better.
No.
Is there anybody in boxing right now, do you think, that's anywhere close to George Foreman level of popularity or marketability?
No, because everybody's fighting behind paywalls and on apps, so no. Remember, he had the luxury of coming up on network TV.
Yeah, it's different time in the world and in
right.
boxing. So one thing about, sitting in this chair, making content, documenting what your thoughts are about boxing, is that you're gonna have a lot of very good takes, and you're gonna have, of course, some not so good takes, and I'm as guilty of that as anybody in the world, right? And I acknowledge that here on True School Sports. And one of the big things that I like to operate on within my life is grace. When I make mistakes in life, I would hope that people show me some grace, right? And I try to show that same grace to others as well, right? So I want to say that to set the stage and give you guys my reaction and my thoughts to this whole Ade Oladipo, George Foreman situation. Because, Ade Oladipo, he's a guy that worked his way up from, being homeless at one point in his life to starting his own channel to eventually, being on Sky Sports. And one thing about me is being someone that has bet everything on himself in his own personal life and with this, and is still betting on himself with this. I have great respect for anybody that goes on to bet on themselves and achieve anything in their life. So I am not coming from a place of hatred towards Ade Oladipo. I don't know the man. I've probably walked by him maybe a handful of times, if that, at events. We never spoken, right? But I got to speak about this because I watched the whole segment. He did a whole podcast with Chris Eubanks. I believe it was his daughter, and G-Man Boxing. Shout out to G-Man Boxing, good channel, right? I watched a couple of his videos over the years. But I sat down and I watched it, and the whole context of this podcast is that they basically have topics, and they get 3 minutes to talk about certain topics. So, like, in that same show, one of the other questions was, should the trainers throw in the towel more? And obviously the one that made the big headlines was it was about marketability. They were talking about marketability and who is the most marketable fighter, right? And G-Man Boxing has stated that George Foreman, he was amongst one of the most marketable fighters in history. And to that, Ade Oladipo said the following, and I quote, "That's horrendous. That's horrendous. What? Because he can sell grills, all of a sudden he can fight." And then that was already bad enough, right? Then he goes on to downplay George Foreman's overall importance in the Muhammad Ali fight with the Rumble in the Jungle. He stated the following, and I quote, "Muhammad Ali could have fought Joe Frazier there. He could have fought anyone. It's Muhammad Ali. They were saying Ali Boumaye, Ali Boumaye. I never heard them say Foreman, da da da. That whole fight, that whole event is Muhammad Ali, right?" End quote. Which really, to me, I don't care. I don't care. But listen, I don't care about context. I don't care about watching the whole podcast. If you diminish George Foreman's role in the Rumble in the Jungle, you sir, do not fundamentally understand George Foreman's importance to the grand scheme of box history. All right. Now, if you want to talk about marketability, okay. maybe Ade Oladipo doesn't grill. Maybe he's never bought a grill. Maybe he's never been to his local Walmart, or in the UK, they don't even call Walmart. They call it Asda, right? Maybe he never went to his local Asda and got himself a George Foreman grill. Maybe they don't. Do they sell George Foreman grills in the UK? UK viewers, let me know. But like George Foreman, he made $200 million off the George Foreman grill, and let's make no mistakes about it. The Salton Incorporated, the people that came to him with that deal on the table, they're not gonna go to George Foreman and offer him the chance to put his name on their product if George Foreman was not already the heavyweight champion of the world. You understand? Like, he got that deal that grossed him over $200 million off of the back of him being a heavyweight champion of the world and being in significant fights with guys like Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali, right? So that's marketability. You want to talk about marketability outside of boxing? I mean, George Foreman had endorsement deals with McDonald's, endorsement deals with Nike, Doritos. I mean, he was on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He was on Home Improvement, as far as the TV shows he appeared on. Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Home Improvement. He's been in all kinds of movies, like Night at that Museum, and they just did a movie about him, a biopic about him a couple years ago. So and there's so many things he's done outside the ring from a commercial standpoint that stamps him as not just one of the most marketable fighters in history, but an American icon and a worldwide global icon. I mean, roughly, they say 1 billion people watched Ali versus Foreman. It was massive. It was on network TV. Different climate, different time in the world, right? So that was a fight that when it happened, make no mistake about it, the world stopped. People were standing there at attention waiting for Ali to fight Foreman because George Foreman was a wrecking machine. George Foreman was literally, people thought Muhammad Ali was going to die that fight. People were concerned for his health. So the aura of George Foreman, the destructive power of George Foreman coming off of the heels of what he had just done to Joe Frazier, that is what helped make the Rumble in the Jungle the Rumble in the Jungle. You understand? It wasn't just Ali. I know in the last decade or so, since Ali has passed, people have really leaned into Muhammad Ali as a social activist and made him a figure of standing for a cause and these kind of things. And so in doing so, Muhammad Ali has become such a figure in the last 10 years since he's passed away. And don't get it twisted, he was an icon too. We're not downplaying Ali, but I'm saying people talk about him a bit differently now that he's not here. And he's been propped up so much so to the point where people that he fought become like an afterthought, And I think even sometimes when people are just talking about boxing and Ali is involved, I hear even in arguments about Ali when you're making certain critiques of his career, you understand? So I'm saying all that to say that George Foreman made the Rumble in the Jungle, helped make the Rumble in the Jungle every bit as big as Ali did. And when you talk about George Foreman, the fighter, I've had the opportunity over the years to speak to Evander Holyfield, as many of you guys know. That was a guy that I spent hours, not minutes. It wasn't just one interview. I'm talking about, anywhere from 7 to 15 different times I've sat down with Evander Holyfield upon hours and hours and hours and talked to him about his career, boxing, heavyweight boxing, and George Foreman is one of those guys we talked about. The second highest viewed video on the history of this channel is an interview where he compares the punching power of, George Foreman, David Tua, and Mike Tyson, right? And that has like 3 million, over 3.5 million views, right? To this day, still doing views, still doing numbers, right? Now, he spoke to me about Foreman many times, Holyfield, and he fought the older Foreman. But one thing he always said about George Foreman is that his punches felt like boulders. His punches felt like boulders, and that was the old Foreman. He still gets the respect of Evander Holyfield to this day. So I'm only saying that to say that, everybody who fought Foreman will tell you he was the real deal, and he became one of the most marketable fighters on this planet. One of the most, forget boxing, he became one of the most marketable athletes on this planet off the strength of who he was inside that boxing ring. You understand? And again, I've had some bad takes over the years. I remember many years ago when I first started boxing, one moment that always sticks out with me is I called Danny Garcia the IBF champion one time, and he had the IBF belt when he was at 140 pounds. And people were like, BT, you supposed to know all this shit about boxing, and you don't know you don't even know what belts Danny Garcia has. And I felt really bad about that because I was younger and I wanted to do a good job. And I understand that even now, I make mistakes now. Like recently, I referred to Filip Hrgovic versus Milos Itama as the Battle of the Balkans because, Itama is from Slovakia, but apparently it's come to my attention that, Slovakia is not in the Balkans. So I say stupid shit all the time. We can all say stupid shit. But if the subject is boxing, if the subject matter is the sport of boxing, this is boxing 101. I mean, knowing the history of boxing is boxing 101. Anything regarding Muhammad Ali is literally boxing 101. The Thrill in the Manila, Rumble in the Jungle, the significance of those fights and how it's made boxing the sport that it is and the heavyweight division what it is and things like that. And so to fundamentally not understand the relevance of George Foreman to said fight and then go on to double down and downplay his importance in the role of that fight, what it shows, and I hate to say it because I'm not judge, jury, executioner, and I'm really at a stage in my life where I'm trying to show grace to people and not talk negative, But you got to call it real and call it right. If you can't understand the importance of George Foreman's role in the Rumble in the Jungle, you have a fundamental misunderstanding of the history of boxing. And I've had takes before in my time on covering boxing where I had to go back and do my homework and realize the magnitude of certain fighters. Like, for example, one interview that I did in 2017 with Don Turner, and I was 22 back then. I kind of downplayed Rocky Marciano, and a lot of people remember this interview. It still gets talked about and gets views to this day. A lot of people, Don Turner had to check me about Rocky Marciano because I knew he was undefeated. I knew he was great at the time, but maybe I didn't understand the magnitude of the great fighter he truly was. So I went back and I really dug into the history of Rocky Marciano, and then I understood, okay, this is one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. You understand? And these things are meant to be learning experiences. You don't got to condemn Ade Oladipo or things like that. But I will say, at this moment in time, and in that moment, Ade Oladipo showed a fundamental misunderstanding of the history of boxing, And he can sit here and spin it because he's doing it now. Oh, it was taken out of context, this, that, and the third. No. It was not taken out of context. You literally said that Muhammad Ali could have fought anyone and it would have been a big fight, which is downplaying his role in the significance of that fight, because Muhammad Ali, the reason why that win and that fight gets talked about so much is because Ali was expected to get his head knocked off his shoulders because George Foreman was that type of killer at that time. You understand? And if Foreman didn't have this aura, if Foreman didn't have this way about him at that time, that fight wouldn't be able to be promoted as well as it was by Don King. You needed the brash, trash talking of Muhammad Ali on one end, and then you needed the cool, calm, but vicious killer of George Foreman on the end, on the other side, and then the backdrop of them fighting in Africa. You needed all that for that fight to be all it could have been globally as an event and as far as significance as a fight. So. Yeah, Ade Oladipo needs to tighten up. George Foreman, let the man rest in peace. He's an American icon. He's a great fighter, an all-time great fighter, and one of the true greats of boxing across all weight classes. And he should never ever be diminished in any way, shape, or form in terms of his importance to not just heavyweight boxing, American boxing, sports, but also just the world over as a global cultural icon. He was not just a fighter. He was not just a heavyweight champion that passed by. This guy was a global cultural icon. Let me recite it for you if you need to get a reality check and have your memory refreshed. The guy made $200 million off of the George Foreman grill. They used his name. They were supposed to give that to Hulk Hogan, who at one point in time was like the most famous guy in the world. They were going to give it to Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan passed on it. They gave it to Foreman because they felt Foreman was the next best option. Foreman was looked at to be damn near next to Hulk Hogan because that was the next guy that they thought of after Hulk Hogan to go do that deal with. We mentioned all the TV shows. like I said, Garfield and Friends, King of the Hill. I mean, Home Improvement, Sanford and Son. I mean, he was in all these different TV shows. How is that not marketable? How is that not a cultural icon? That guy was a superstar beyond superstardom. You understand? So, big wag of my finger to Ade Oladipo and anybody who ever fixes their lips and downplays one of the true greats of sports. Forget boxing, sports, any sport. Baseball, basketball, footy, college sports, hockey, anything you want to name. George Foreman is one of the greatest athletes of all time. One of the most iconic athletes of all time. So I'll leave that there. God bless everybody out there in the world. Show Ade Oladipo forgiveness, because the good book says, "Forgive them, Lord, for they know not of what they do." And he just, in that moment, he didn't know what he was talking about. Sometimes I don't know what I'm talking about, but we use these moments when we're supposed to use these moments where we don't know what we're talking about to come back better. So I'm sure he'll come back better. I've been in that chair before. I've been scrutinized for not knowing what I'm talking about sometimes, and it is what it is. So those are my thoughts.